Hello, this is Pemi Aguda, and this is how I create.
Welcome to This Is How We Create, a show that digs deeper into the creative life of contemporary artists of color. Discover what feeds their creativity and how they found or are finding their artistic voice. Through these intimate and candid conversations, you'll gain insights into the lives of creative professionals of color that are hard to find anywhere else.
Hey, welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin, your host. Today we have writer Pemi Aguda on the show. Before we begin, I just want to say that this episode will deal with very adult matters. So if you have kiddos around or if you have sensitive ears, please come back to us. We will be talking about suicide as part of a fictional narrative. If you are struggling with suicidal thoughts, please know that you are not alone and that there is help available to you. We have some resources included in the show notes that are listed below. So please enjoy. Today's conversation features the wonderfully thoughtful Pemi Aguda, who's a fiction writer whose journey from Lagos, Nigeria to international publication is as fascinating as her stories. Now, when you were a kid, do you remember making little mini magazines or mini books? Pemi was doing exactly that as a 6-year-old. She describes herself as having been a lonesome child who found refuge in books, which naturally led to her own stories. What I love about this episode with Pemi is how she talks about her creative process so honestly. She shares how she lets her stories fester in her mind before writing them down, or how she sometimes prints out her digital drafts so that she can see them with fresh eyes. Pemi is so honest with her path, and there is something so relatable about that, from her passing stories around her classmates and getting revenge by making people into characters, as she calls them, into sordid characters. She studied architecture before finally embracing life as a writer and as her calling. When she's not crafting stories, she's busy playing jigsaw puzzles or bad tennis, her words, or watching murder mysteries. So grab your coffee or tea, get comfortable, and join us on the conversation where we talk about creativity and the weight of ancestry. Oh, don't forget that we're going to talk about finding your artistic voice as an artist. All right, let's tuck into our conversation with Pemi Aguda.
Welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin. I'm your host, and I'm so pleased to have writer Pemi Aguda on the show with us today. Welcome, Pemi.
Hi, Martine. Thanks for having me.
Pemi, I'm wondering if you could just start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do for your creative career.
So, I am a writer. I write fiction, I write short stories. I am also working on a novel. That's my creative practice.
Well, I love it. So, Pemi, you were born in Lagos, Nigeria. So, could you share with us your childhood memories of what it was like to grow up in Lagos?
Well, I grew up with my parents and my two sisters. Between school and church and our small house in estates, I lived a kind of insular life. My parents were a bit strict, so we didn't do lots of wandering. And I was a bit of a lonesome child, and so I took to books very quickly. Or maybe because I took to books, I was a lonesome child. I don't know which started which, but I would read a lot when I was a child, and I learned to entertain myself that way. And that's kind of how this whole writing thing got started.
Gosh, Pemi, I think I have that in common with you. We moved to the US from Haiti when I was young. And because we didn't speak English, books were my very dear friends, and I didn't have any friends. And I think to this day, it's my greatest pleasure to sit with a book to read. And you, growing up, loved reading. And I'm wondering, at what point did that translate into you starting to write?
Hmm. I couldn't tell you exactly when, but there are little magazines and stories that my parents still have in their files from when I was maybe 6 or 7, where I put a little story or I created a whole magazine where I was the sole contributor, complete with illustrations and everything. So it started pretty young. I mean, at the time, all the things I was writing were pretty derivative of what I was reading. So the British mysteries that I would read influenced my writing very strongly. So I was writing my own version of British mysteries with little kids with like blue eyes and blonde hair. And then that changed over time. But at the beginning, I was basically echoing what was coming into my head.
So you started creating these magazines when you were very little and then starting to write stories. And I'm wondering, at what point did you start feeling like, oh gosh, I think I want to do this? And enough so that you eventually got an MFA in writing.
Oh, that's a long journey. So I'd always been writing, right? I would write stories in really boring classes in secondary school to entertain myself. And at some point, it started to entertain my other classmates too. So I would write short stories and pass them around. And if I didn't like somebody in class, then I'll make them a sordid character in the short story. So that way everybody was entertained. And then at the time, I would write little notes on Facebook where they were like really short stories. So I'd write really short stories and post them and have people interact with them. And then somebody I know, or somebody who knew me like pretty casually, told me that he had a blog and would I be interested in collaborating and writing short stories together. And so that was my first version of publication, I guess. He and myself would like go back and forth and write short stories, and people seemed to like that. And then somebody else who ran this website that was quite famous in Nigeria at the time called Naked Convos. It was fiction and nonfiction, opinion pieces, all of that. Reached out to me and asked if I could write a fiction column. So I did that for maybe 3 years between the age of maybe 20 and 23 or so, where every Tuesday I would write a short story and then people would comment on it and interact with the characters as if they were real. It was kind of wonderful. And then a friend said, "Hey, have you heard of the Farafina Writing Workshop," which is the one that's run by Chimamanda Adichie, or was run by her. And I hadn't, so I applied and I got in. And that was the first time it occurred to me that writing could be a career, because I met other people who were just as enamored with books and writing as I was. And I saw the writers who came in to teach who were just doing this thing with their whole lives. And it was very inspiring. And I think that was the first time it occurred to me that I could take this thing seriously. Of course, I didn't jump from there to the MFA because it's a real world and you had to make a living. And I had done undergrad in architecture. I went and did a master's degree in architecture, went back to Nigeria where I worked at a firm. And then I won a writing competition. And then I won another writing competition. And then somebody said to me, "Have you heard of an MFA?" And I said, "What is that?" And they said, "You could read and write for 2 years, funded." And I said, "Sign me up." and now here we are.
Of course, in some of the briefing questions we sent over, I did have like, what was it like to transition from architecture to writing? And you just gave us the condensed version. I'd love to go back when you were writing weekly stories. Can you talk to me about that time and how you came to understand what started to interest you during those exercises?
Well, because of the particular platform that these stories were being published, I knew that the stories I wrote had to be the kind where people would have something to say, something to discuss, because it was kind of platform where like comments were always popping. So I knew that there had to be some kind of issue. So I think now that you're asking this question, I think maybe that was the first time I realized that stories mostly have to be about something. Like, what are you saying here? And so I got inspiration just from, they were really short stories. Some of them were as small as a scene, just like a scene from somebody's life, but where something strong enough happens that it feels like a change has occurred in that person's life. And so I just would get inspired from just life, people on the internet telling stories, Nigerian newspapers, the radio, everything around me would inspire me to just write a really short thing that had enough in it for people to have conversations about it. Like, oh, should that character have done that? It's fascinating because very differently from the MFA, those stories were engaged with as if the characters were real in a way that I don't know that I've had since then. Do you know what I mean? Because in writing school, we're interested. I mean, that's the point. We're interested in how a story works and what the effect is and how we can improve that and like pacing and all of that. But back then, when I was writing those short stories, people talked, they're like, oh, I can't believe Amaka did that to Joseph. What would you have done if you were Joseph, So the characters were treated as real in a way that I'm grateful for.
Do you think that has influenced how you build your characters even to today?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I don't think that's how I build character. It's been so many years I've been reading. I think I've grown as a person. So I want to hope that I'm writing just like deeper, truer characters. But more than anything, I think it was foundational for me because it made me realize as a writer that I wasn't just writing little stories in quotes, that stories could have like real life effects on other people.
That must have been so much fun. So you've gone on and you've gotten your MFA and now you teach writing. I'm curious as to the process of you coming into your own and understanding what your creative voice is. Can you talk to us about how that's come about?
That's a very good question. Sometimes I still ask like why I'm teaching and who I am to think that I can teach. But the truth is that over time, I think I understand stories in a way that I didn't before. Just by bent of reading so many and talking to so many other writers and, writing them and revising and writing. And so more than anything, it's just time, the accumulation of time that has really opened my eyes to, it's wonderful. I was teaching a workshop yesterday and we had my students and I just had a really good workshop. And I left thinking, wow, I enjoyed this so much, even though I don't necessarily love teaching. I don't necessarily love teaching the craft of fiction, capital letter C, capital letter F. But I enjoy talking about stories and saying, hey, this is what I think this thing is doing here. And if you shifted it here, this is what, it all feels very subconscious because it's hard to articulate. But when I read a story, my brain just starts moving like, oh, this is how we could maybe be better. There are so many untapped, potentials in history. So I don't think that has exactly answered your question, but that's when I enjoy teaching the most, when it's just like down to how can we make it a better story.
So then how do you approach your own process?
My own process of writing, let's see, it's different from story to story. It's different from story to novel. But what happens is when I have an idea, which can come at any point, I could be watching a movie, could be reading a book, I could be having a conversation with friends. But once the idea is in my head, I try to give myself time for it to kind of fester in my head. Time, I think, is the most important thing. So while the story is festering, forgive the word, at the back of my mind, everything I engage with in the world, just like living or reading or writing or whatever it is, kind of filters through that idea and gives it like edges, makes it sharper. And then when I think I have enough of a hook on it, then I will go to the page and write. The thing is that if I start to write it before I think I have a full grasp on it, then it can sometimes it like peters out. I realize I don't have enough to keep going. So it's important for me. I think that's the most important thing about my own personal process is giving the idea time enough in my head for it to form itself before I start to dig into it. And then once I have a draft, I give myself more time so that when I get back to the page, I can read it like a reader, as opposed to the writer. And then that helps me revise, which is my favorite part of the process. And then I'll share with friends and trusted readers and then go back to the page again.
On average, how long is that process?
It differs. I once wrote a story in 4 hours. I woke up that day and I just like spat it out almost from a dream. That was once. Another time, some have taken me like 2 years to write. So it truly differs from story to story.
So Pemi, as you have a story in the back of your mind, is that the only story you often have? Do you ever have more than 1, 2, or 3 stories going at the same time?
No. I have story ideas that I always write down so that even if I don't have time to ruminate, I can always they won't just disappear into the ether. So I write down every time a story idea occurs to me that I think is good because, I have silly ideas all the time. Or if I think it's good, if I think, oh, there's something here, then I'll write it down. But truly, I think I can only work on one story subconsciously at a time. So currently I'm deep in revision for my novel. And that's the only thing I can think about. It's the only thing I can think about. I'm having dreams about it. In conversations, when I'm reading other books, it's just there at this invisible screen, not about everything, just infused in my whole life. So the way I am, I couldn't think of a different idea. I didn't know with this much depth. I couldn't be steeped into a different idea the way I am in this novel idea right now, except I were to mentally put it aside and then think about something else.
I'm curious as to the process of writing this novel because, we've been talking about your short stories and now we're talking about a novel, which is obviously longer. How has that process been for you?
It's been so hard, my team. It's been so hard. I never thought that I would write a novel. I truly have considered myself a short story writer. But here we are. And so it's hard. It's hardest because it's so much scope to keep in my brain. It's so many layers, so many people, so many ideas that just keep colliding. But it's also exciting because I've been in this world for maybe the past 4 years now. And I keep coming back to the story. And so now it feels like I really know the world in a way that I didn't last year, or that I didn't 6 months ago. So although that scope is challenging, there's also something beautiful about how it can just like take over everything.
Pemi, can you tell me a little bit about your short story collection that's coming out in May, correct?
Yes, May 7. I'm so excited. Ghost Roots is a collection of short stories, 12 short stories, all set in Lagos, Nigeria. And the stories are about women, they're about some men, they're about families, and the question about who we are, who our families are, if we are independent of everything that has come before, all the history that has come before, and just being a human in Lagos, the city, and the things that we want to do to belong to the city of Lagos.
So could you tell us a little bit about your novel and when it's slated to come out?
The novel is called The Suicide Mothers. It's set in Lagos. It's about a young girl who moves to Lagos from a smaller city in Nigeria, and she is pregnant. And in the world of the story, pregnant women are jumping into water. And so with this strange thing happening in the background, the young woman has to figure out whether or not she wants to be in Lagos. And then there's this she also works at this architecture firm, and she starts to see that the dreams that she had of this city are not quite what they seem from afar. And that's slated for next year. All things being equal, I think.
Oh gosh, but I'm so excited for you and I can't wait for the book. But you said that you are still in the editing phase, correct?
For the novel, yes.
And so is this novel, does it feature the lives of Nigerian women?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, one of the questions I have for you is in past interviews, you said that you've become interested in the lives of Nigerian women and the weight of ancestry. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about what you mean by that.
Well, Nigerian women, because that's who I am. That's who was, those are the people around me. And those were the lives that directly intersected with mine every day. My mom, my aunties. I owe a lot of my interest in books to one of my aunts who lived with us for a bit when she was going to university. And I was talking to her recently, and she said that she remembers every time I wrote a story, I would immediately run up to her and say, read it now, read it now. I didn't remember any of this, but she did. So yeah, these are the women who raised me. And so it just was natural that I would write about them. In terms of ancestry, I think for me, what it is that for reasons that I don't necessarily want to get into, but we being me and my siblings didn't really go to our parents' villages. And I only know my family line up to a certain point. And I've always been jealous of the people who can trace their family lines back by, 6, 7 generations. So for me, some of the stories I write is into that desire to know like who came before me and like trying to imagine what it is that we have in common. Because as I started to become like a young woman, I was thinking a lot about like, who do I want to be? And is it possible to be who I want to be without just echoing everybody that has come before me? I look a lot like my mom. And sometimes I find that I act like her too. And so there are moments like that when I am just struck by how, even though we think we're individuals, we really are just not.
Yeah. Oh. I look exactly like my mother and I look exactly like my father at the same time. And when I see photos of myself, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my mother. Or the other day, she sent me a photo of me when I just graduated from college and her when she was really sprightly. And I just saw myself in her. And it's really amazing how much of our lineage comes through and in ways that we don't even realize it. Because even on the genetics side and having worked in the public health sector, when there were talks about epigenetics in terms of how our genes are expressed, and they're often expressed several generations in the present, right? So there are things that are happening in terms of how our genes are expressing that happened several generations ago. And so there are so many echoes of ancestry that are being heard on a daily basis and, throughout our lifetimes. And to think that this is us, we're independent, we're automatic, and we're not influenced by what has come before us is really, it's a bit naive. And I think here in the US, especially, we often think, oh, yes, you're an individual and that's that. It's so much more complicated than that.
It is, yes. When you get around to it, the first story in my collection is about a woman who starts to see her own mother's face in her daughter's. And this is and the daughter has never met this grandmother. So yeah, that's something I was thinking about in that story.
So Pemi, can you talk to me about some of the writers past and present who influence your writing and your way of seeing the world?
Ooh, I love this question, even though I'm going to start blanking on names because that's how it works. But let's see. You probably Rich Dancica on the show. She's a big influence in my life. And I was so excited when she got to be my mentor in 2021 in Miami. But I remember reading Creek Crack and just being blown away, talking about women, like everyday women. I think she's one of the first people that I started reading who made me realize that there were stories in everybody and there was nobody who was beneath being a main character in a story. I loved Sefi Atta as Everything Good Will Come. Between Sefi Atta's Everything Good Will Come and Kate Chopin's The Awakening, I think those two books really did something to my idea of feminism. They just articulated ways of being in the world that I had always felt strongly about, but hadn't been able to articulate the way that they did. I remember reading Elena Ferrante's The Neapolitan novels and feeling like I was having a whole education just about life and friendship and socioeconomic themes, all of that. And then when it comes to style, I think about women like Shirley Jackson, Laura Vandenberg, Yoko Ogawa, Hong Kong, just women who write into the strange and the surreal. It really excites me when I read stories that tilt into the unreal. And so those women really influenced my work. I remember the first time I read Laurie Moore's short story collection. It's called Self-Help. And it was one of the first examples of like a second person narrative, a second person point of view. And I just remember being blown away, like, oh, you could write short stories this way. I had no idea. So yeah, those are some of the many, many women who have influenced my life, really, because to me, everything is connected. Like my life, my art, my work, all of it is one and the same.
Well, they always say that for writers, everything is fodder for a story. Pemi, I'm wondering what some of your habits and routines are around writing when you have, whether it's your novel or past short stories. Are there specific routines that you follow?
I wouldn't say so. I think the most important thing for me is to read. So if I'm about to go into revision or editing, then I'll either read a book that I want to inspire me on the sentence level, or a book that that has a similar mood or atmosphere that I want to evoke. So for me, I think reading as a kind of foreplay, if you will, is important to me. Otherwise, I don't necessarily have a lot of routines. Here's something I said to some students the other day. I do think that when it comes to revision, I like to defamiliarize my work so that it feels like I'm seeing it afresh. And I do realize it's a trick that I'm playing on myself. But if I have written a story on my laptop, then I want to either print it out or read it on my phone just so that the words appear differently and somehow it feels like I'm seeing it anew. And that really helps me with revision.
And do you do your own revisions or do you work with an editor? How does that work?
Well, now I have an editor I have editors because my story collection and my novel were acquired. But when it's just a first draft, I will use my friends, mostly my friends who are writers, who I trust, before I even send it out to my agent or my editor.
And I always hear that the editing is the hardest part of the whole process. Do you find that to be the case?
I love editing. I love revising because the raw material is already there and now you just have to shape it. Obviously, it's frustrating when things aren't going quite as I would like, or if I feel like I'm making no progress. That part is frustrating. But for the most part, if I have a first draft, then I have a first draft. And then it's just about tweaking and shaping and fine-tuning. And sometimes destroying to start again.
That's necessary.
Sometimes, yeah.
What are some advice that you give to your your students who are just starting out and you want to, they come seeking advice on how to be a better writer? What do you tell them?
I tell them what everybody tells their students, which is just to read a lot. Because I find that it's true. Just read a lot and read outside your comfort zone. Read outside of what you're comfortable with. I just said that. But if you think you'd like a certain genre, read something else. You'll be surprised. Read fiction, read nonfiction, read poetry, read hybrid stuff, read stuff published 100 years ago, read stuff published last week. Just read everything. I think that, yes, I went to an MFA and that was so useful in many ways, but reading is the best teacher.
Oh, such good advice. So you're currently in Philadelphia. How is it writing about Nigerian women away from home?
That's a very good question. I'm surprised I haven't gotten more of before. But the thing is, I do go home often. I was home last year. I was home the year before that. I'm going home in July. And so I still feel very connected to Nigerian women. I have friends here who are Nigerian women. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I want to be in the meat of things, but it's complicated. And so I go home when I can.
So, Pemi, when you are not writing away or observing others, walking about and letting the world come to you and being present, what do you do off the clock? What do you do for fun?
I do jigsaw puzzles. I watch murder mysteries. I'm obsessed with murder mysteries. I like to run. I like to play bad tennis. I like to go eat with my friends and go disco dancing.
Those sound like really great things. So for me, I'm a big jigsaw person as well. And I found, my sister sent this to me on Instagram, where there are jigsaw puzzle solving competitions.
Really?
Yes. So if you could imagine a gym, an American gym with tables, like 20 tables, 30, 40, 50 tables, and there are pairs of people, they all get the same puzzle and they have to go. And
I don't know if I would like that.
I don't think I would like that at all, because puzzles for me, it's just so therapeutic. Why would you want to do that? But anyway, everyone's different.
Everyone's different. I like my puzzles slow. I like my puzzles measured. I take, 1 hour today, 1 hour tomorrow. I take my time. It's soothing for me. I wouldn't want to add a competitive, straight to that. Yeah.
Same here. And which murder mysteries do you like?
All of them. I love so many murder mysteries set in England and Ireland and Scotland with the rolling graves and one pensive detective, something's going awry in a small town. Those are my favorites. Not quite cozy, but not gritty either. I like the kind of murder mysteries where I'm feeling bad for the killer at the end of the day because I'm like, oh no, you didn't really mean to do it. Or so it's more complicated than we think, I like complicated murders.
Oh, I guess it makes for a good read, right?
That's the thing. I enjoy watching murder mysteries more than I enjoy reading them. For some reason, the atmosphere. I like watching fog and all of that.
I like that as well. I didn't realize it was kind of like my comfort place to watch something on the BBC or on PBS here in America, some tea and a murder mystery. And I started getting into Murder in Paradise. I don't know if that's even the title of it. Have you seen those? It's this British guy who goes to a French-speaking island, and there are all these people. Like every episode, there's someone who dies.
Yeah.
You've seen that one?
Seen a few episodes. I definitely know who you're talking about.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who watches it, but I guess not, because they have 13 seasons and the whole cast has changed. It's a thing.
It's a thing.
Well, Pemi, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I can't wait for your new novel.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this was great. Thanks for having me.
Hi there. I have a quick favor to ask you before you go. If you're loving the show, would you mind taking a quick second to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite go-to podcast app? Here's the thing. Those reviews are like magic fairy dust. They help other creatives of color discover our show and tap into their own artistic superpowers. While you're at it, why not subscribe to our Substack newsletter, Creative Matters? Creative Matters is like a weekly dose of inspiration delivered straight to your inbox. You can find the link to subscribe in the show notes. All right, that's all that I have for you today. I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Bye.